is spot removal's not very good in the Whip Mirror matches because it's about Whips and Hornet Queens. And cards like Hero's Downfall and Murderous Cut, they aren't really that great. So if people start cutting those cards from their deck to make room for more Haymakers, more creatures, more things to synergize with Whip, that makes it much better for Blue-White Heroic, which cares about removal spells, but not really about blockers, as they have a number of ways to grow creatures to too large of a size, or just ignore blockers altogether with things like Aqueous Form.
All right, Stephen Mann starts out on a Temple. Be Tranquil Cove from Joe Lossett. Yeah, kind of a lot of mulliganing here. Mann started the game on 5 cards on the play. Lossett is on 6 on the draw. So he's up 2. But we'll see if both players can get hands that they like. Should be important.
Joe, what appears to be a solid mix of lands and spells right now, including what I have to imagine is a very well-worn Flooded Strand.
Absolutely. He has 2 creatures. He has a Seeker of the Way and a Favored Hoplite. A lot of times this heroic deck, you are protecting that one creature very hard.
One of the best cards in this deck to that end is God's Willing. It's one of the most important features of this deck. It makes it so efficient to protect your creatures, and once you start getting Ordeal of Thassa and other enchantments online, things quickly grow out of the range of blockers. So it really puts your opponent in the squeeze. They need to have a removal spell right now because blockers down the road don't really matter.
Yeah, the cards that Lossett needs to be wary of in Mann's deck are copies of Hero's Downfall, which are there to 4 copies of Murderous Cut, and the 3 copies of Hornet Queen. All of those will take the wind out of the sails of one of these beefed up creatures.
Yep.
Or heroes, if you will.
I get it. We'll be here all weekend.
Oh, man. Temple for Joe does mean that he would have to tap down to put in, or he wouldn't be able to leave up God's Willing as much as he might want to. He's got the pieces, but he's pretty slow out of the gates right now.
Well, the other line of play he has access to is just casting Seeker of the Way this turn, so he has a second creature in play. Even if Steven untaps and kills one of them, not really the end of the world.
He's going to go way more aggressive than that. He's going to God's Willing the Favored Hoplite to get it moving. Pro-green. Sees a Hero of Erois. And he'll put it to the bottom. What this does do is next turn, if he makes the Ordeal of Thassa in his hand, he'll get to crack it and draw 2 that turn.
Yep.
That's a play that I would say otherwise seems fairly strange, especially against a Courser.
And if he has a second God's Willing in his hand, then he still has protection available.
Yeah, once he gets his creature up to a 4/5 and cracks the Ordeal, that does mean the Stubborn Denial in his hand will also become a hard counter.
So it's a bit of a non-intuitive play, but there's a lot of upside here, depending on how things break for Joe.
Polluted Delta for Mann. He'll get on the attack off zone, swings Courser. And it looks like he'll go for Sidisi Brood Tyrant. One way to answer the heroic deck, of course, is to just race it. Sidisi, very good in the mid game. It's a lot of power for 4 mana.
It is. It's still a tough deck to race, because once the Ordeals start adding up, it does not take that long for even something like a Hoplite to get to lethal. Both these players almost certainly competing in the Players' Championship 2 weeks from now. Joe with his spot already locked up, and Steven in a great position to get one of the 8 at-large bids at the end of the year.
And we have Sidisi Brood Tyrant. And we will go ahead and look more at that, what's at stake here this week and next for the Players' Championship. Sidisi does mill a creature for Mann. And we back over to Joe. There's 7 power on the board across from him, so there's some concern on Joe's side.
Another way that these decks can make up a damage race is with Ordeal of Heliod, 1 copy in Joe's deck, and of course 4 copies of Heliod's Pilgrim to go find it.
And it's Ordeal of Thassa will be the play from Joe. It's what he was setting up for last turn with the God's Willing. Target the Favored Hoplite. Ordeal will tick up, go to 3, break, and Joe will get 2 cards. At some point, I imagine here, Mann will start chump blocking with zombies.
Well, I think his ideal scenario is DC attacks and generates a chump blocker every turn.
Right. And that way, instead of pushing 5 a turn, he's pushing 7 a turn.
Right.
That's a 3-turn clock instead of 2.
and Joe leaving land number 5 on top of his deck. And I think the reason for that is he wants to play Heliod's Pilgrim next turn, find an Ordeal of Heliod, gain 10, and try to win the damage race that way.
Corsair Crufix, the draw from Mann. See in his hand, he also has a copy of Murderous Cut. Doomwake Giant waiting on top. Be a swing for 7 of Mann. He's just going to mill the Doomwake, get another 2/2. It's nice to know guaranteed that you're getting the zombie when you're in Mann's situation.
Yeah, Corsair plus a DC is a lot of really nice synergies here.
And Lossett drops to 11 on the attack. It'll be Corsair of Crufix for Steven.
Steven just trying to remain as patient as possible with that Murderous Cut. The writing on the wall is that, you know, it's probably not going to resolve as long as Joe has a mana up, and he's hoping that it can induce Joe to tap low.
(17-11), Mann leads. He does have a black up for Murderous Cut, so we know Joe has that one covered in a couple of different ways. God's Willing and Stubborn Denial.
Although Joe is trying to set up a turn of Heliod's Pilgrim for Ordeal of Heliod, that is his whole, that's all of his mana. So he goes with that line, the Murderous Cut, probably ends the game.
And you have to think that Joe knows that one, that he'd be taking a big risk if he goes for that line.
Yeah, I don't think the game is in such dire straits that he needs to do that right now.
Swings with the favored hoplite, that's 4 damage if Steven chooses to take it. Sidisi really shining this game.
Yeah, it's been great, applying a lot of pressure and giving Steven a lot of chump blockers too.
And Steven will take the 4, drops to 13.
Much better, I think, than Siege Runner would have been in the same game.
Yeah, it's done a lot more work. Seeker of the Way is the next play for Lossett, and Hero of Erois. Leaves the hand of Stubborn Denial, Heliod's Pilgrim, and God's Willing. Doesn't set up the Heliod's Pilgrim play.
I think he still wants to leave up the Stubborn Denial here. Because the way the board is right now, Joe is looking at lethal. So he has to block. And this makes it pretty attractive for Steven to try to fire off a removal spell, I feel. So he can afford to wait one more turn. So if he finds land number 6, then he has a lot of protection for that same line of play. And in fact, he doesn't even need to do that next turn because the Hero of Erois discounts the enchantment by 1. So he can still do everything with Stubborn Denial.
Oh, you're right. If he leaves the hero alive, then he can just make that play next turn, even if he doesn't top deck the land. All out swing by Steven. He first gains 2 off that Landmore Wastes. Mills another copy of Sidisi, which means another zombie in play. And still Tie Charm on top of the deck. That's another pinpoint removal spell.
Yep.
So this swing is for 11 exactly. So that's going to have to block somewhere. He has to decide, is it better to discount that Ordeal, or is it better to possibly have lifelink on Seeker? Or do you just trade them both?
He can just put a double block in front of the Sidisi. That's an option that he has. And whichever creature Joe gets to keep is probably fine by him. And if Steven goes for a removal, like a double block here makes it very attractive for Steven to try to use a removal spell.
Yes.
And then you get to make use of your Stubborn Denial here for good value.
He's going to go ahead and chump Sidisi and trade with a zombie. And this is dangerous. He's just going to go for the God's Willing. And this is going to end up really poorly for him.
Yeah,
he's going to lose his hoplite, which I guess maybe isn't that bad. This Hero of Erois isn't that much worse than a favored hoplite.
Yeah, there's so many different things going on. It's hard to know. We're working with information because we know each other's hands. My instinct would have been to probably just run a double block on Sidisi because it's likely to, if Steven has a removal spell, it makes it very attractive for him to go for it. And you definitely get to keep at least one of your 2 creatures.
Yeah.
And if he makes a move, then you get to keep both, which is great.
Yeah, the God's Willing didn't catch anything, I guess, with this line.
Well, it does pump the Seeker of the Way and eats a zombie. So he gains 3 and makes some inroads on the board.
And Steven's going to cast Murderous Cut on, it looks like, Seeker of the Way of all creatures. It's interesting. There were good arguments for Steven to kill all 3 of those. He can deny life gain. He can kill the biggest creature, or he can save his Sidisi. Life gain turns out to be the deciding factor. Joe will take 8. Sidisi will die. Joe Scry, the card is Defiant Strike. Don't think he's keeping that one.
Although the way this breaks for Joe, he's still in pretty good shape because the next turn he does get to Pilgrim for Ordeal of Heliod, gain 10, and still have Stubborn Denial left over. And Steven next turn is only attacking for 10. So the Ordeal is a wash on Steven's combat next turn.
Yeah. Do you think if you're Steven, then you need to keep the Sidisi alive? Because that's, he's going to run out of chump blockers now that he doesn't have a Sidisi.
Well, it's not clear if Ordeal is necessarily the only card that Steven's playing around right now.
Sure. Could be something like Spectre Ward we've seen.
Yeah, I mean, that's the most dangerous card here just because it's the easiest way for Joe to catch back up, but...
Here we have from Joe, Heliod's Pilgrim.
There's just a lot of different things for Steven to play around here is part of the problem.
You're absolutely right. It's going to be Ordeal of Heliod. Now you have to decide where it goes.
I like diversifying a little bit. I think I would get it on the hero. Because you still get the third counter this turn. You get one from the heroic trigger, and then you get another one from the attack trigger. And you're not all in on one threat. And because Steven has a sea of chump blockers, I think it's important to try to create 2 big threats.
I agree. He's going to go all in on one, though, so that he can leave back hero to block.
This makes some sense, too. I can get behind this.
Joe goes to 15, 6 damage in on Steven, and now Steven's down to 9. Joe does have Stubborn Denial up for that Sultai Charm.
And I guess the way the board is currently constructed, Steven doesn't really have an on-board attack except for attack with both coursers. If he's attacking, he's losing a zombie to the 3/3.
Joe will pass.
Yeah, I think Steven is still contemplating a chump block here.
Okay.
So he has the 1 zombie back.
Yeah. Can he afford to go to 9? There's a lot of danger here, especially when your opponent's a 6-power creature that suddenly just Stratus walks and Defiant Strikes, for example, and then you're dead. It's 9.
Right. No, this deck can kill you out of nowhere.
Just draw a Sultai Charm. Next card up is Sylvan Caryatid. That's not going to be very helpful. And if you're Mann, you have to think here that this Sultai Charm is no good.
I don't know. You've seen 2 copies of God's Willing. It would be a lot for Joe to have another reactive spell here. There's also the issue of what else is the plan here.
Here's what I'm thinking. If Joe did not have an answer to the Sultai Charm he knew about, that Ordeal would have gone on Hero of Aerois.
No, that's a fair point.
So if he's putting all his eggs in one basket, I'm worried that he knows something I don't. Because this play looks really bad against Sultai Charm.
Yeah.
That said, Mann may just have to go for it anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can see his expression there. He does not look like someone who is confident in this board state.
Well, he can't attack right now, and he can't block either. So he's got to. The way that things are currently going is not sustainable. So he may just have to make a move.
And this is where that ability on Favored Hoplite is so relevant. When you target Favored Hoplite, he does not take damage that turn. So you'd think, hey, Steven could just throw everybody in front of Favored Hoplite, but all that takes is 1 targeting spell from Joe to knock that one out.
Yeah, it's not safe.
And Stubborn Denial does get the Sultai Charm. Looks like another Defiant Strike to draw for Joe. Now Joe has to weigh what all he wants to attack with.
The Hoplite's definitely a freebie. And then the hero is a little bit more dangerous to attack with, but there's so many different cards that Steven has to play around here that he still may not block appropriately against the hero. So I like putting it to the test. The worst case scenario is you trade off the hero for probably at least a Courser, maybe more. And best case scenario is way better than that.
Yeah, you can for sure trade it off for more than the Courser, if you're willing to Defiant Strike it twice.
Yeah.
See, Mann's going to chump the Hoplite, it looks like. Interesting. Maybe if he doesn't block the Hoplite here, he's dead.
Correct. Yeah, playing against Blue-White Heroic is so hard. There's just so many tricks. And right now, Joe has probably the worst possible hand from Steven's side of the table, which is 2 copies of Defiant Strike. He has 2 targeted spells inside of combat.
And they draw cards. Yeah. So he's going to throw every chump block at the favorite Hoplite and attempt to kill the Hero of Eros. Joe's going to target Hero of Eros. That makes it up to a 5/4. He'll draw.
Okay, Joe still needs to order blockers here. And this is important because he's working with some unknown information. He doesn't know what these Defiant Strikes are going to yield, so.
Yeah, Steven's stopping him and asking him to order blockers. Right now, I do not believe Joe can save his hero. He's just killing things.
Correct.
Draws a land. Defiant Strike it again. Now it goes up to a 7/5.
But if there's God's Willing or Feet of Resistance here.
And there you have it. That is God's Willing.
Perfect.
Now, he can use it that way. He may also want to hang on to God's Willing just as a way to push one attacker through later.
I like doing this just because he knows that Steven is drawing a Courser next turn. Oh, sorry, a Caryatid rather. He's drawing essentially a blank, so.
And he'll ship to the bottom.
And this is why the ordering blockers matters so much. The way that things worked out, if Joe had ordered Courser first, he would have gotten both the Coursers. Now, he was assuming that he wasn't going to draw anything particularly good here, and I think the way he ordered blockers is correct, but that's why it's important to get it out of the way first.
Down to just a Courser and a Zombie for Mann. He'll draw Caryatid, top card, Hero's Downfall.
Not a shabby draw. It's still not a long-term solution, but to get back in the same, Steven's going to have to draw a removal spell to removal spell.
Yeah, right now, Joe has no God's Willings left. I mean, well, he only has 1 left in his deck, actually.
2 copies of Feet of Resistance as well, and 1 more Stubborn Denial. So still some productive draws, but this Hero's Downfall is likely to kill something. I really like Steven here trying to figure out what he can attack with. He knows that, he's going to have to chump block with the Caryatid. He doesn't need to chump block twice, and it's important for him to be attacking.
And the draw here, a real good one. It is Heliod's Pilgrim from Lossett.
Yeah, a lot of good options with this. Because of the Hero's Downfall on top of the deck, it's not great to get the Aqueous form, but he can just go get another Ordeal of Thassa at the worst.
Yeah, Ordeal of Thassa. Stratus Walk isn't even terrible. It doesn't draw 2, but it draws 1, and it gets a guy through unblocked, which is pretty valuable. He has Mann down to 9. If he gets Stratus Walk, he can put Mann to 2. Actually, he can put him to 1. Because he... Yeah. Could put him to 1. That's how he's going to swing both his creatures. Doesn't need to give the one of them evasion, really.
Right.
Mann goes down to 3. Joe will play Heliod's Pilgrim. Now, the 1-ofs in his deck are Aqueous Form, Ordeal of Heliod, and Stratus Walk, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And he'll go with the Stratus Walk. Gives a creature flying, makes it so it can only block flying, and draws a card.
To be honest, I'm not even really down on the idea of putting that on one of the Heliod's Pilgrims. Because you effectively generate a third thing that needs to get killed.
Yeah, it seems decent. Hero's Downfall, the draw for Mann. Land War Wastes for free. Mann goes to 4. Next card, Polluted Delta. That one's not going to be much help.
I think Steven's still got at least a turn left between his blockers and, but I guess.
He cannot beat the Stratus Walk, and he's going to go ahead and pack that one in. He'd have to chump away his whole board, and he knows his next draw is no help.
Sure.
So game 1 goes over to Lossett. And it's an impressive game because that's one that I thought was looking very good for Mann, especially with the Sidisi hitting each turn.
And that block that Joe made where it looked like he was giving up some of his board. I mean, things were not looking good there for Joe, but it just goes to show you, once that deck gets something good going on offense, you can't really block anymore. And Joe was able to hold the ground off just by making a 3-3 and threading some other pump spells. So Joe was able to turn that around, and that's an interesting dimension of the blue-white heroic deck I don't think enough people give it credit for, is you can win 7 and 8 turn games. It's not like Boss Sly where you had to have them dead by turn 4, they're not dead at all. You can go long because the creatures you make are so big, you draw cards off Ordeal of Thassa, and you have more staying power than I think a lot of people expect.
So we go toward game 2. Steven, we'll go to Mann's sideboard first. Can look for more interaction. Probably try to overload on removal if he can. And he's a little light on this. He has the Pharika, God of Affliction, that can make Death Touchers, which can be good here. He has 2 copies of Reclamation Sage, and those are not particularly bad as they can take care of cards like Aqueous Form in this matchup that can really hurt. Outside of that, there's not too much that I would think he'd want to be using. Cards like Ashiok, Drown in Sorrow, Doomwake Giant don't seem particularly good here.
Well, Drown in Sorrow can be really good on the play because it takes a little while for the ball to get rolling on the blue-white heroic side of the table. So if you're able to keep their board contained for, or you know, they spend their early turns getting some stuff into play, they're not really growing it, and Drown in Sorrow can be really good there. So I think those are going to come in. I think the 2 Reclamation Stages are fine. Although a lot of the enchantments, the ordeals, they don't really hang around for very long. 1 Pharika's okay, but as we saw, Joe's got a lot of ways to ignore blockers. So it's not something that Steven can lean on, but it's probably an upgrade over other cards in the deck.
On Joe's side, what do we have?
A Seeker of the Way, 2 more copies of Ordeal of Heliod, 2 Glare of Heresy, and Erase, 2 Laguna Bond Trailblazer, and Ajani's Presence, an Aqueous Form, a Singing Bell Strike, 2 copies of Stubborn Denial, a Negate, and a Treasure Cruise. I like bringing in I think the Treasure Cruise is pretty good here. I think the Singing Bell Strike is reasonable as a target against a lot of mid-range strategies. The one is Ajani's Presence, pretty good answer against Hero's Downfall, Murderous Cut, and so forth. The additional, one copy of Erase, rather, a lot of enchantments, of course, in Steven's deck, and I think the 1 copy of Treasure Cruise can come in the long game.
So are cards like Ajani's Presence better than things like Stubborn Denial in this matchup?
I think so, because they can also help inside of combat, where Stubborn Denial does not help.
I guess my other question is, how worried does Joe have? So Joe needs to protect his own creatures here.
Yep.
Does he have to worry about a card like Whip of Erebos? If Mann gets one down, can Steven just race Joe?
It's possible, but it's tough to win that sort of game. I think it's low on the list of cards Joe has to worry about. I think the Stubborn Denials are pretty bad against Sultai Reanimator in general. There's not that many spells, and most of them can be paid for because they're not that expensive. So you really need to get a 4 power creature in play before it does much of anything. I would definitely rather have Ajani's Presence over it. The only upside for Stubborn Denial that Ajani's Presence does not have is the ability to counter Whip of Erebos. Besides that, I think you're much better served just having Ajani's Presence.
We'll be going to game 2. Mann will be on the play here. These players are at 4-1, meaning they will need to win out from here to make it into the top 8.
It's going to be a tough cut, and we've been looking at our players to watch. So many big names in attendance. A lot of them weren't even able to get on our players to watch board because we have so many big names. And, this is round 6. And I think for the rest of the day, we're going to have feature matches like this. 2 very good players, 2 players who will be in our Players' Championship in 2 weeks. And they're going to be in lose and you're done territory for the rest of the day. No way to avoid it in a field that's this relatively small, stacked with this many good players.
Sure.
In a lot of respects, it's almost like a preview for the Invitational.
Said before, that 12 next to Stephen Mann's name, that's important right now due to the race we have going on, which will conclude next Saturday at our last invitational. If you look at our leaderboard, this is the race for the SCG Players Championship, which is in 2 weeks. So Kevin Jones, you see up there at the top, has a pretty strong hold on the Season 4 Points Championship. 9 more players will qualify at the end of next week's invitational. So Kevin will be our season winner, almost certainly. We look at other names, Ross Miriam, Gerard Fabiano, Logan Mize, Kent Ketter, they're all looking pretty safe. But when we go to page 2, we're going to look at the players that would really love to shore things up. You see Jeff Hoagland, he's not here this weekend, nor is Jim Davis. 2 players in attendance, though, 11 and 12. The last 2 in right now are Brad Nelson and Stephen Mann. He's at 12th right now.
And I believe both players at X and 1. So there is, as you can see, they do have a bit of a gap over Dylan Donegan, Andrew Tensham, Eric Rill, and so forth. But a good performance here can really cement it because there's still the possibility of getting caught at the invitational if things break in specific ways.
All it takes is one between Donegan, Rill, and Tenjum. It just takes one of those players to post make an invitational top 8 run, and you don't want to be the guy in 12th if that happens.
Exactly. So for Brad and Steven especially, there's a lot riding on this tournament because they can really cement a spot at the Players' Championship with a good run this weekend.
It's not so much what they care about is you would like to be 9th or higher going into the last weekend. You don't want to, if someone makes a run, you don't want to be the guy in 12th, and you'd really prefer not to be the guy in 11th. I think if you're 10th or higher entering the invitational, you are more than likely safe.
Yes, that sounds right.
Right now they are 11 and 12, so that is why they're here this weekend. See Joe on the draw. He's the first player with a play, though. It's going to be Seeker of the Way on turn 2. Mann's first play is Courser of Crewfix. We'll reveal a Satyr Wayfinder. Pass the turn.
And Joe has gotten through step 1, which is untap with a creature in play. The game gets a lot easier from here.
See a collection of creatures here for him. He has a copy of Heliod's Pilgrim, Battlewise Hoplite, Defiant Strike. See who chooses to go with. It's always easy to see whether or not Joe has a basic land in his hand because of those beautiful revised basic arts he likes to play.
For me, there's some amount of nostalgia because those are the first lands that I played with.
Yeah.
On the other side, they are pretty ugly. So it's tough.
It's hard when you see the art on the Flooded Strand and then you look at the art on the Plains and you say, you know, that's really a similar looking card.
It's quite close.
Here, Seeker of the Way swings in. Mann does not want to lose that Courser. He'll have no blocks.
No reason. Even something like Defiant Strike.
Right. which Lossett has.
Yep.
Lossett had the option to make Battlewise Hoplite there instead of opting to play nothing. Does not want to take down Mann at any point here. And so Mann will keep developing. Here's Satyr Wayfinder. Mills Farika. Does give him his choice of lands, however.
And I think that Steven had no land drop to make this turn otherwise, so this is a pretty big hit. And gets an opportunity to also flip over a new card to Courser.
Takes the Polluted Delta, finds a land on top. Great sequencing here for Mann. Taking the fetch land so that he can later on have a reset for the Courser if he needs it.
Shuffling's really valuable once there's a Courser in play, so I like taking the Delta there.
Courser will swing back. You see Sidisi Brood Tyrant, the next draw here for Mann. That also looking pretty good right now.
Though, as we saw last game, it is not impossible for Joe to overwhelm even that.
No, Steven had one on turn 4 on the play, made a zombie, got off 2 attacks, made zombies both of those attacks, and did end up losing.
Yep. In pretty convincing fashion once it was all said and done.
Seeker of the Way swings in again. Mann will drop to 16. As long as the creature's a 2/2, he seems pretty content on just taking hits from it.
There's just not a lot to be gained by getting involved in combat at this stage.
And Joe will play more creatures. Had Hero of Erois, but opted for Battlewise Hoplite. Hoplite, one of the best creatures in the deck to target, really. You get a counter and a scry every time you do it.
They're all pretty sweet besides the Pilgrim. They've all got good stuff going on.
All right, scanning through Joe's hand, he has a copy, it looks like, of Erase, Heliod's Pilgrim, Feat of Resistance. Erase is going to go ahead and take care of the Courser. waited until Steven's draw step.
Yep, this way you got to see what Joe was drawing. If it's something like Whip of Erebos or Doomweight Giant, maybe he holds it because there's nothing coming and there's a land on top, which he doesn't want Steven to get for free. He's taking care of it now.
Now, the concern there is by letting Steven see the card, Steven can now be smarter about cracking that fetch land he took last turn. So there is some give and take to that play.
Given that there's other problematic enchantments in Steven's deck, I like taking the look. I think it's worth it from Joe's side.
And Steven doesn't really want to draw the land, so he's going to crack Polluted Delta here. Just finding more base than the island. Doubling up on all his colors.
It's really fun to watch this blue-white heroic deck in action when two good players are in the match because there's so much cat and mouse game going on.
Yeah.
With Steven is not willing to cast a removal spell in the face of open mana, and Joe's not willing to tap out.
And right now, I think the only protection spells that Joe has are his Feet of Resistance. I think he's playing a rather honest game. Steven makes a CDC and hits a zombie. Yeah. Now there's a second one. So Joe has Feet of Resistance, God's Willing, and Defiant Strike as his tricks. As his creatures, he has a Hero of Auroras and a Heliod's Pilgrim. And a lot of his attacking power is centered on that Heliod's Pilgrim, so when he decides to use it will be pretty interesting. Here's a awfully bold attack.
But he's doing this with God's Willing.
Oh, yeah.
Backup, and I believe a Defiant Strike too, so we might see some fireworks this turn.
This is when if you're Steven, you can't just let him, you have to call him eventually.
And you have 1 mana left over at the end of your turn. It's a pretty good spot.
Question is, does Steven have the Murderous Cut here? He's representing it. Joe has to be careful of that. So a double block on Seeker of the Way. Joe will use, looks like to be his Feet of Resistance. Try to score the 2-for-1 here. So we'll put a 1/1 counter on Seeker. It'll prowess up to a 4/4, and it will get protection from the color of Joe's choice.
So
if it works.
As things stand, this does just clean up both of Steven's blockers, and Joe does not lose the Seeker.
Now, if I have a Murderous Cut and I'm Steven Mann, I probably want to use it here, even if I don't expect that it's going to work. Because Seeker of the Way is a fine creature to have Joe spend a card on.
Yeah.
You know, he's going to use the cut. Joe can use the God's Willing here, but Steven's, that trade, the God's Willing for Murderous Cut trade, is bound to happen at some point.
And this is not a bad spot to do it, where, you know, the creatures that Steven's losing inside of combat aren't really critical to him. He's not taking a lot of damage this turn as a result, so not a bad spot to pick a fight.
So God's Willing will give him protection from black, counter the Murderous Cut. Now the Seeker will be a 5/5, thanks to 2 prowess triggers. With lifelink, it'll take down both the blockers. Steven will take 2, go to 12, Joe up to 22. But by losing both Feet and God's Willing, Joe has exhausted his protection.
Exactly, and now you see, you know, Soultide Charm in Steven's hand. He might be able to, if he can find another removal spell or just blockers, may be able to manage this board.
Gets to swing with Sidisi. There's a lot of good things going on here for Mann. Sidisi will attack. It mills a Sylvan Carry at it. That'll get him a zombie. Starts anew on the life total, down to 19 for Joe. But rather than killing something, Steven's just going to play a giant creature of his own. This one's Soul of Innistrad.
Okay. We're taking it to the streets.
It's a 6/6. You got, that's going to be, you know, there's a Hornet Queen in the graveyard. If Joe doesn't hurry up and win here, Steven's going to start really making haymakers.
Well, the problem is that hurrying up and winning is something this deck's very good at, and you see the Pilgrim in hand. Joe can go ahead and, if he goes and gets something like an Aqueous Form and puts it on the Hoplite, The Hoplite cannot be killed by the Sultai Charm because it's an ultimate price.
Now, I just want to throw something out here. If you've been following us today for our first 5 rounds, and all of our first 5 rounds today, I believe the winner of every match we've had on camera has either been a Whip of Erebos deck or a Jeskai Tokens deck. If Joe can take down this game, we'll see that there will be another winner this weekend.
It's at least 3 decks floating around.
That said, unlike the other matchups where I feel like these Whip of Erebos decks are strong favorites, this is the first time I've watched the Whip decks, and I've thought maybe I'd rather be the other guy.
I feel the same way. I do not think this matchup is great for the Whip decks. I think it can be okay for some of the white-based builds, the Abzan builds that can board into more sweepers.
Sure.
But I think Sultai is in trouble in this matchup.
And the play from Joe is going to be Heliod's Pilgrim. That'll find his one of Aqueous form. And it looks like he's going to cast it on Battlewise Hoplite, spreading his counters around a bit. Another Aqueous form on top of his deck. Does he want it or not?
I mean, if he's worried about Sultai Charm, it's a really good card to pick up because Steven doesn't have the option of just blowing up the Aqueous form and blocking. So
exactly. Battlewise Hoplite will come in for 3. Mann drops down to 9. Joe ignores his Scry trigger. He already has the card he wants. Back to Mann. Has the Sultai Charm. Draw for the turn was a Swamp, but he does have a 6/6 Death Toucher. If he can somehow manage to block creatures, he'll be well positioned for combat. Not to mention, he has just a lot of power on the table. He maybe can race.
yeah, no, he's got I mean, it is a lot of power. It's 11 with, most likely it's going up to 13.
Can Steven just race here?
Well, I think the Murderous Cut alongside the Sultai Charm is going to be too much for Joe to overcome here.
Enough spot removal can get it for him. You're absolutely right. Between these Sultai Charms, Murderous Cuts, and Hero's Downfalls, looks like the magic number may be 3 for Steven. The third one is the one that gets it for him. Swing, he's going to leave back the zombie. This time, Sidisi does not make a blocker, so it'll just be 9 points.
Only 9?
Only 9.
A mere 9 points?
Yeah, that's easy. Joe will chump the soul. So he just takes 3, goes to 16. And now, does Steven dare to let Joe untap, or does he just kill things?
With a position this commanding, I would be inclined to just kill his stuff.
Sorcery speed, both the kill spells?
I think so.
Looks like Steven's going to go for Whip. He's going to delve it fully. What that tells me here is that if that's the play he makes, he's leaving up enough mana to activate Soul of Innistrad. Instead, it looks like he's going to pay. I'm not sure how much he'd need to activate Soul. There's, like I said, the most appealing thing in his graveyard is a bunch of cheap blockers and or a Hornet Queen.
Yeah. And I don't think that Steven really needs to get that fancy here, because the 6/6 Death Toucher is going to be enough to take this over once Joe has no board.
Yeah. So 2 kill spells, and that was exactly what he did. He feels he's ahead enough that he's just going to mow everything down. Now on Joe's side, that draw of Aqueous form way less threatening.
No, I would not rule Joe out of this game just yet. He's not facing lethal this turn. He has another Aqueous form.
Yep.
If Steven does not have a removal spell, it's very possible for Joe to just kill him next turn.
He's going to cast Ordeal of Heliod on the hero. Yeah, he has remaining 2 cards are Aqueous Form and Defiant Strike. I suppose the reason to strike here would be if a Temple's on top of his deck, he'd want to draw that.
But I think he might need the +1 next turn.
It's close. He's just going to put, and he does, he's going to put Aqueous Form on it now.
He always has the option of just Defiant Striking in his own upkeep and putting a Temple on the bottom. So he kind of gets the best of both worlds regardless. And the 1 point of damage could really matter.
Back over to Mann. His hand is just a Sidisi and a land. That's not going to do much, but his board is threatening.
And all Steven can do is generate blockers. That's all he can do, and that doesn't matter right now against Aqua's form. So,
yep, mills 3, one of them is a creature. He'll get a zombie. He'll deal 11 to Joe. That's Joe. Well, Joe can block, which he probably will do.
I wouldn't risk it. Any block means that Drowning Sorrow's turned back on. And next turn, it's either Joe wins next turn or he's dead anyway.
The question, I guess, would be, can Joe buy, if he by blocking, can he buy himself another turn here?
If a creature's on top, I guess it can.
The Ordeal will crack and gain him 10, so he's not actually dead next turn.
Sure. No, that is true, yeah. He probably gets a second turn out of it if he blocks, so.
Man, now with options, he does have a Sidisi in hand. He also can use Soul, cast a 2-drop, and then make a Hornet Queen or something next turn. Or he can just replace his Sidisi.
Whatever puts the most damage into play, because there's nothing to be gained by blocking. So the only thing that matters is what generates the fastest
then it's
clock.
Sidisi.
Yeah, and I think it's Sidisi.
Even though she's just really just a hill giant here. Well, sorry, a 5/5 rather. The mill trigger does hit, makes another zombie.
Yep. It's not a bad deal, but.
See Joe down to 8. Draw appears to be, I want to say it's a God's Willing.
Yep. I was really surprised to see Joe not use the Defiant Strike inside of his own upkeep, because I think all the cards were on the table there.
Right now, his creature will be 5, 6, 7. If he God's Willings first here and finds another targeting spell.
Never mind, yeah, he doesn't actually have the...
Yeah, pro-black, so we'll watch this play out here.
Yep.
So he's going to scry. He wants to find another targeter. The Plains isn't going to do it. Right now, his creature is a 5/5.
Excuse me, he was a point short with any random targeted spell, so.
Yes. If his Defiant Strike finds another targeting spell here, he will win. He has it at 5 on 6. It'll gain 6 off the attack from the Ordeal. 7, 8 from the Defiant Strike. If this Defiant Strike hits, that's number 9. There we go. So he is up to a 6/6. Ordeal will crack. Joe will go to 18.
And he still has the ability here to scry first.
Yep, and Joe, that's why he's doing this in combat. He wants to scry with the Aqua's form before he uses the Defiant Strike.
Yep.
It does take away a couple outs. If there was a
Ordeal.
Yeah. If there's an Ordeal, that won't work. But the scry, I think, too valuable. If he just made it main phase, he'd have it there. I mean, that's where you just have to count your outs. It's just some math there as to which one you're supposed to do.
If Joe was going to Defiant Strike anyway, then I think he should have just done it straight away.
Well, it depends how many targets he has. It's just right. You can just crunch that one out. That looks like it's going to be 8 points of damage.
I think he's found Ajani's Presence.
And that'll do it. Ajani's Presence will be 9-10. You have it. Joe Lossett 2-0 defeats Stephen Mann. He stays alive for a top 8.
And this is the first time that we've seen a Whip of Erebos strategy fail this weekend, and I think this matchup's just challenging for the Reanimator deck.
Yeah.
As you can tell, both these decks are very good at blocking Sultai and Abzan, but when the Heroic deck is firing on all cylinders, you can't really block. It puts a lot of pressure on your Murderous Cuts and your Hero's Downfalls.
Yeah, one of the things that these Abzan Reanimator and Sultai Reanimator decks have really had going for them is that you can't fight on the ground versus them.
Yeah, it's true, and Steven got a lot of pressure to play. He had a lot of quality blockers, but that was not enough to stop the onslaught. He needed more spot removal, and he even drew a fair amount. He had a Murderous Cut. He had a Sultai Charm. That's a lot for his deck. There's not really that much spot removal in it, but it was not enough to weather the storm.
And I think one of the things you can see this Blue-White Heroic deck benefiting from, especially if you're playing like Joe Lossett's deck, is some of the decks he doesn't want to see are things like Mardu, for example. That deck's